So this full moon in Capricorn is going to have us possibly having some tough but necessary conversations, maybe even with people who are very important to us. And I want to talk to you exactly about why. Hi, I'm Crystalline. I'm your astrology mentor. And today we're going to talk about this full moon happening in Capricorn, which is, of course, you may have heard the sign of the moon's detriment, but that doesn't always mean that bad things are going to happen. So what I want to do is actually show you the screen. I'm going to show you the chart of the moon and explain to you exactly what we're looking at and why we're pulling some interpretations out of the chart the way that we are. And then we're also going to talk about what you can do to use this energy, to apply it, how you may recognize it in your life, and how to move consciously in alignment with it as we go through this full moon in Capricorn. All right, so what we're going to do is share the screen so that you can see my lovely Luna software here, where we get the whole chart going on here. And you can see that this full moon happens on July 7th at around 7:38 a.m. East Coast time. I just picked New York because it's a really good East Coast generalization. That's where a lot of our East Coast time things are based. So we use this, again, just noting that for something like this, because this is just New York, we don't really look at the ascending here, unless you are in New York. That'll add some extra context. But for everybody else, we can adjust the chart to our time zone, to our location, and see what the rising might be and what that says for the areas happening in the area that we're in. But as you can see, the thing that I would do with this is just take a look at it, notice the moon, because that's what we're really focused on, and then see where Capricorn, where the moon is, falls in your own chart. That's going to be our primary focus for how to apply this to your life. So we don't have to get confused or tangled up in the whole big chart in and of itself. Really, what you see on this screen is what we're going to be talking about for the most part when we talk about this full moon. So with that, we look at the full moon and we say, okay, this full moon is happening not in her favorite spot. And when I say that, I mean that the full moon is considered to be in detriment. And detriment is simply the opposite of being in domicile. So we can look at the sun being in Cancer. And by the nature of a full moon, that puts the moon opposite that. So if Cancer is the moon's sign, then the moon is far away from home, doesn't have the resources she usually needs, isn't really in her comfort zone, and kind of like where you would stay at a 5-star hotel, but you end up in a hostel, one of those situations where it's just not the usual that we're used to, but we can be resourceful and we can find ways to work with that. And in fact, what we see here is Jupiter is very close. So this is giving some support to that moon. These are saying, I'm getting some resources from my friend Jupiter. So we can see how aspects come into play and a little bit of how they work as well. This trine aspect, nice green line with a little triangle there, shows that this is a very supportive, easy aspect for the moon to receive from the greater benefic, Jupiter. So that's actually very helpful for the situation that we're in. We also see that the moon is opposite Mercury, and that Mercury and the sun are quite close. In fact, a few days prior to this, Mercury and the sun were exactly conjunct in what is called cazimi. When a planet is exactly conjunct the sun, they are called cazimi, in the heart of the sun. So Mercury there is opposite the moon as well, which gives us this tension. If you can think of an opposition as a rope being pulled tight with tension, we see this tension or reflection or one side and the other really coming into play with a full moon. Typically, the full moon is always in opposition to the sun. But what we can say about it is, while we can look at the tension thing, we can also say that gives us a moment to see how far we've come and reflect. This is a halfway point between two new moons, right? So it's seeing how far we've come, perhaps in the last 2 weeks, or perhaps in the last period between the time that the moon was last having a lunation or a full moon in Capricorn, which would have been, of course, in Cancer, which would have been during Capricorn season, which would have been in the December, January period. So you can also look maybe 6 months ago and say, the last time we had a lunation happening like this, what did that look like? When the moon was new back in December or January in Capricorn, what was I doing and how far have I come since then? Or in the last year, when the moon was new in Cancer, as the next one will be, we can actually look at this and go to the next new moon after this one is going to be another new moon in Cancer. How far have I come since then? So you can see how there are layers. It's kind of like a cake or an onion, if we want to go with a Shrek reference, to how you can look at this. For today, just focus on where's Capricorn in my chart and where am I gaining clarity in my life based on the fact that the full moon is present there, showing me stuff that's going on. And so with that, we might also be having some conversations, Mercury, that help it really illuminate that for us. And again, with Mercury and the Sun in Cancer, these might be ones with family. They might be ones that are emotionally driven conversations. They might be hard conversations. We do have the Moon in Capricorn, and they might be for the best. They might be something that's like, it's rough to talk about, but it's worth talking about. Let's get this figured out so that we have clarity, transparency, and trust in our relationship, and then we can move forward. It's one of the things that I would think about for this. Additionally, we can look for added context from the ruler of the moon. And so Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. If we come over to Saturn, we see that Saturn is in trine with the sun, therefore would be also giving a sextile to the moon over here, and has this sextile still separating from Jupiter. So Saturn actually is part of this conversation and in supportive aspects to that. Saturn is retrograde, so we may be thinking a little bit more personally about things. We may be revisiting certain things, but at least Saturn is getting a lot of help from friends here, including if we think about the moon being over here as well. When I pull up the chart, you can see the moon's at 11 degrees. This chart is putting that a little bit out of orb, which I would kind of agree with for the moon. She moves pretty fast, but thinking about this as a moment, we can maybe consider that to be relevant. So Saturn is getting a lot of support and is also supporting the moon and the sun in this, which is very helpful. So we have like a little bowl forming here between them, all talking to each other and having at least nice things to say. Then we can think about some things that are just added context. We've covered the moon, but I also want to keep looking at a couple things here. I want to keep in mind some stuff that's going on with Venus. So she's got a lot of activity going on. She's getting a lot of attention right now, as she deserves being in Leo. But thinking about Venus and how close she is to Mars right now, this might brew some arguments in relationships. Now, the good news is they are not going to get together. Venus and Mars are not going to actually conjoin. So it's like we're coming up to this and then we're fading out. And in fact, it's actually going to be months and months before they get together again, before Mars and Venus actually do conjoin. One thing to keep in mind, though, is we did just a day or two prior to this have that square with Uranus between Venus and Uranus, this red line here. And this is something that we're going to be seeing again because Venus and Uranus are they have squared each other on July 2nd. And whatever came up then is actually going to be up for revisitation when Venus starts her retrograde on July 22nd. So as she moves forward, she's going to, on July 22nd, go retrograde. And maybe I can click on this and it'll show us. So if we look at direction changes here, we can actually see she's stationing retrograde on July 22nd. Things to keep in mind is that Uranus square was right there. And so when we look at this Uranus square, we see that that is probably going to happen again because Venus is going to be covering these degrees one more time. She will be retrograde from July 22nd straight through until September 3rd. And in that time, she will interact with Uranus again. And then after that, she'll go direct and perhaps run into Uranus one more time, which is why I'm saying whatever story may have started around July 2nd with this square with Uranus, we have plenty of time to work this out. There are plenty of time, plenty of opportunities for us to see where this is going, what's being revealed to us. It is a longer story than just a one-off transit. So that's something to keep in mind too. Which again really goes into the fact of these conversations that may be difficult, maybe a little bit heated, but they are necessary. And if we keep our mind focused on the fact that we are trying to gain clarity, maybe less on being right and more on understanding as a focus, we are going to get through a lot of cool stuff. We're going to move forward in stronger relationships. And that's one of the ways I would take this and alchemize it for the better. Keep an eye on wherever Capricorn is on your chart, whatever slice of the chart it is. As you can see, every sign makes up an entire chart. So you do have every sign here, even if there aren't planets in it. Right now, if you're looking at Capricorn and you're saying, oh, it's in the 6th slice of my chart, but there's no planets in it, the moon is still transiting there. So the moon is still talking about this part of your life. In the 6th house case, that's health, service, routines, and sometimes your day job or your work. So things to keep in mind with that. Each slice, of course, has its own theme, and I do post horoscopes on my pages on Instagram and TikTok at The Real Crystalline. So I do all that work for you, and I give a really nice reflective question for you to be able to use for your specific life situation with how this moon is bringing that up. So that will be posted on the 3rd of July as well, and then you can catch your personal horoscope there. Now, as far as looking at how we can apply this, we've talked about that a lot. Another thing I want to consider is maybe working on forgiveness. And in this case, it might be forgiving yourself for things that you're too hard on yourself for. This is a very Saturnian moon, and it is a moon that's wanting to give. That's what she likes to do. She likes to nurture, but on this case, she might be turning on herself and saying, I have things that I'm not happy with. And you might realize that we're all going through stuff, and it's not always just your responsibility to do something. And so you can let a few things go. You can forgive yourself for certain things. You can take the weight off of yourself in certain ways. Have a conversation with your younger self about how far you've come in the things that you're thinking about and where you're growing into next. That will really help. And as far as an affirmation that might help is, I am strong. I am the strong and beautiful product of everything I've ever known and experienced. So I'll say that one more time. I am the strong and beautiful product of everything I've ever known or experienced. And so that might, at the very least, help you remember that, yeah, there might be some things that aren't your favorite memories, but they brought you to where you are. And where you are is full of potential for where you're going. So I'm very excited to see where you're going from here. I hope that all of this has been super helpful and informative. And I hope you have an actually constructive, wonderful, nurturing full moon in Capricorn with people who can help you the way that those aspects helped themselves. Remember, turning to other people, getting by with a little help from our friends or family or loved ones is another way to really work consciously with all of this energy. And if you want to work consciously with me as your personal astrologer or in a consultation or even as your astrological mentor, you can check out the link that's going to be in the description here with all of that stuff on how we can work together, and I can be there for you more personally. And I also have a really fun PDF of a PowerPoint presentation that I've created giving you the major dates for July and all the lunations and the movement into the new solar season and all that fun stuff. So you can find that below. And I hope that you have everything you need to thrive.